Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Roundup. I am your usual host, David Fox. With me, also as usual, is my usual co-host, UberHansen. Folks, tonight we now enter into the dark age of the offseason. There's not a lot that's going to be happening. The NFL schedule is supposedly releasing sometime this week. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot that's going to be going on. So tonight begins our first week of trying to provide both entertainment and also genuine analysis, like we always try to do here. Except, now that we're in the off season, nothing's really happening. Our work is not really done for us. So we're going to be doing a tier ranking of the AFC tonight. We've done this the third year now that we've done this. Kyle and I used to do this. It's now Uber's first year doing it. And it's going to be a good time. Before we get any further, though, Uber, how are you?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm interested to see how the next, few months go as we're trying to fumble for content here and there. But what better place to start than a tier list of the AFC? This I'm actually really, I think this is going to be a good conversation.
I agree. It always ends up being a good conversation, even though we always try to end up like damping down, like, some like 2018 trend or whatever is, we're doing it in 2024, but yeah, it always ends up being a good discussion. Before we get too far into things, folks, we are of course brought to you by many things, but not the least of which is those of you who are One Pass subscribers, and here to tell you more about that is our wonderful friends Greg and Aaron.
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
Thank you to Greg and Aaron for that read. As usual, always on point, 100% correct every single time. Folks, they are not the only ones who are sponsoring. We also have the wonderful folks over at Underdog Fantasy. Folks, if you just have that one home draft, and that one draft a year isn't enough for you, go to Underdog Fantasy. We here at Cover One are excited to partner again with them. You have all the fun of drafting your own players, but without the waivers and the lineup decisions. Best ball drafts have allow you to have all the fun of drafting your own team, all the chances to win big, and none of the week-to-week hassle. If you use the promo code COVER1 when signing up to make your first deposit, Underdog will match that deposit up to $100. That is a free $100 in free play if you use promo code COVER1. You are not getting a better deal than that pretty much anywhere. So head to Underdog Fantasy, use promo code COVER1 to make your first deposit. Sign up today and start winning today. We are going to be doing our tier list. We've got 16 teams to go through. It seems like not a lot until you realize that both of us can be very long-winded, and that 16 teams actually is a lot.
Yeah.
So we are going to just jump right into it, and I'm going to share my screen as soon as I get the right screen. There it is. Yes, there we go. All right. So we have at the top, let me see. I don't know if anybody can read that. Is that readable from this? Is there a way to?
I mean, I have it full screen. I can read it. So.
You can read it. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit, just a little. Make it slightly more bearable. There we go. That seems better. So at the top we have S tier or Super Bowl contenders. We also have the angling for a playoff spot. We have blips on the radar. We have crud on a stick. We have down bad, and then we have failures. It's going to be... We're going to start with the Bills. All right. And I don't know where you are currently at with the Bills. Obviously, this is a Bills podcast. We are a Bills team. But, I let's just start. I'm not going to try and preface the same. Where do you want to put the Bills right now, based on what we know?
Somebody could make an argument to me that they belong in A tier. I'm not going to go with that. I think they're still S tier. They still have Josh Allen, and then if you look at the entire roster as a whole, like, yeah, Stephon Diggs gone is a big deal. Mitch Morris gone is probably the second biggest deal. But outside of those two players being gone, I think that they've actually done pretty well in filling the holes on the roster, plus getting back, hopefully, Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard. Like, I still think they're competing for a Super Bowl. I don't think that I can really, truly listen to anything other than that.
2 words, Josh Allen.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to sit here and talk about how, going into last year, when Kyle and I did this last year, there were definitely concerns about that Chiefs roster, right? Like, they didn't have any distinguished wide receivers. That absolutely ended up biting them in the ass. We felt like this defense could take a step forward. Maybe this is a defensive team, but at the end of the day, they still had Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, and Patrick Mahomes. The most important of that is probably Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. So, in that same vein, Josh Allen is not Patrick Mahomes, but he's as close as anybody else is ever going to get at this point. And I don't think that is really being thought about. And yes, there's been tons of players, tons of experience that has left the building, tons of leadership that has left the building, and I get that, and that's a tough thing that they're going to have to figure out. But it's not impossible to overcome, and it's not like they've just been sitting on their hands like the Dallas Cowboys, right? Like, who have done very little outside of the draft to try and address the different areas of need that they have on their current team. The Bills went out and got guys that fit what they want to do. I mean, even after the draft, getting guys like Deion Jones, who I don't think that much of, but is still a guy, I guess. DeJuan Smoot, who could actually play into this rotation, potentially, at defensive end. Guys like Casey Toohill, Austin Johnson, and Deshaun Williams. I mean, there are plenty of guys that they brought in to help fill out the parts of the roster that they needed to in order to put themselves in a position to compete. They took some flyers on guys like Quintez Cephas, KJ Hamler, even Chase Claypool for, again, some reason. But that also didn't stop them from getting somebody that they genuinely like in Curtis Samuel, right? Like, they've done what they needed to do in order to remain competitive. And that, to me, even happened before the draft. And then you add guys like Cole Bishop, like Keon Coleman, Ray Davis. I mean, there are guys that are going to be contributing in year one. And I think that you combine that, where I feel like people are kind of almost underrating this roster now. Yeah. With the fact that you still have Josh Allen, you have Joe Brady, who, so far from what we've seen, has been better than Ken Dorsey, even using Ken Dorsey's playbook, essentially, right? Like, he was doing things with that playbook that Ken Dorsey was not doing. And in general, just seems to have a better feel for play calling than Ken Dorsey has. So I think having a full offseason with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator, installing stuff that he wants to do, doing things, tweaking little parts of the offense here and there, I think you're going to see some really good stuff from the offense, more consistency from the offense, which is very, very important, obviously. And the defense now, with Bobby Babich being the defensive coordinator, we don't know if he's going to be calling plays. I don't think they ever really specified that, right? I think McDermott basically gave a very, non-committal, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Which kind of makes me feel like he's leaning towards being the play caller, but also having someone that has the actual title of defensive coordinator that seems to want to bring new ideas, right? We can paint Bobby Babich as defensive coordinator, and some people might say, well, he's been on that staff, it's just going to be McDermott's defense. To a point, maybe philosophically, to a point. But even then, like, there's a clear shift in wanting to incorporate more man-to-man coverage, right? Like, that's why they got rid of John Butler, who was, like, the zone coverage guy for defensive backs, and they bring in this new guy from the University of Miami who has experience with Georgia and Kirby Smart's system there. You even drafting someone like Cole Bishop, right, who they kind of talked about as like, hey, we want somebody that can play man-to-man against tight ends, and this is somebody that we think can do that. So I am going to agree with you. I think this is an S-tier team still. They're certainly not the only ones. Yeah. And, yeah, it's going to be a tough battle for them to, I mean, even winning the division. But I do think that until I see someone else actually knock them down, I'm not going to predict anything other than a 5th straight AFC East championship for this team.
Yeah, and I think people saying that the Dolphins will win, people saying the Jets will win, no one's saying the Patriots will win. But the people saying those two teams are going to win, I think that's more wishful thinking than the Bills fans saying the Bills are going to win another division title, because we've seen it. We've seen Josh Allen stand on his head at moments to get them there. We've seen Tua crumble at every single step of the way when it comes to chasing down the division title. We've seen the Jets just fall apart due to injury, and not projecting injury, but you look at someone like Aaron Rodgers, who's going to be in his 40s. We don't know what he is. So I just think it doesn't make much sense to argue that the Bills aren't going to win that title. You can wistfully think that if that's the case, and it very well could happen, but right now the Bills are still the kings of the AFC East.
I 100% agree. Just looking at some comments here. Joe DeRosa, under review. Go watch on Tuesday nights, 7:30. I don't know why, but just got a feeling that the man on the left has a clean pull. That is true.
Very true.
I don't know if you posted it to Twitter or not, but it's a nice pull, man.
Yeah, it'll be posted soon. Just another humble brag.
Chris716, go Bills. I agree. Go Bills. Rory Collins says, I've often wondered what the letter E ever did to not be involved in the grading system. That's a great question. That's something I should ask my dad. He was a former teacher. Should ask about that. I don't know. I've thought about that before, but I haven't been in school in a very long time, so it's been a long time since I've thought about that.
I'm going to bet it has something to do with the Latin language for some reason, even though I have no idea. Yeah.
Adam Lulov says, Josh has some attributes that Mahomes does not have. Lord Korvax says, yeah, we have Mahomes syndrome. Our guy, like Mahomes, is unique, and I'll take our guy. And all accurate, I think. Adam Lulov also says the team needs to stay healthy in order to contend. Yes. It just does. You know, there's no other way around it. Like, and I don't want to say like, oh well, what they went through last year, that'll never happen again.
Happens every year now.
Like stuff happens, man. Weird things happen. They happen every year. It could happen. Something like that could happen again. I will say it would be very difficult to have devastating injuries at defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back all happen in the same like 2 to 3 week span, right? Like that would be hard to do, to replicate. So we'll see what happens though. Steve Noble says, do you guys think that making massive changes like we have this year makes us less predictable and harder to play against? One would hope so. One would think that that's the purpose of those changes, that maybe they felt like they were getting too complacent in what they were doing, despite the fact that they were still good at it, right? Like they were, once you, like they had that string of injuries on defense, it clearly affected what they were able to do for a time, where it really came to a head in that Eagles game, right? Like where they gave up 39 points to them, losing in overtime, obviously. And then from there, the defense really started to adjust a lot better. They had the bye week to kind of regroup. They played a lot better down the stretch. And you saw that even going into the playoffs, where, like, sure, you lose to Mahomes and the Chiefs, but you give up 27 points. Yeah, that's their highest output. But, I don't know, like, the defense did as best they could, and they suffered even more injuries into going into that playoff game, right? Where once they had kind of figured out what to do, then they suffered more injuries, and it's just it's tricky. But I think that in itself is also a good measure of how open this particular staff is and this regime is to looking at what the actual mistakes and problems are, and not just sort of hand waving away like, oh, we just had a bunch of injuries. You know, what we did last year is perfect. We can do this. We can do it again. Kind of like what the Jets are trying to do, right? Where they're just like doubling and tripling down on these decisions, and to a point they kind of just have to. And we'll talk about the Jets very shortly. But yeah, like you got to be able to look at what you did wrong and try your best to rectify those mistakes. And I don't even think that, like, philosophically or schematically, that there was something inherently wrong with the defensive scheme in particular. But I do appreciate that they're making changes, and especially with the whole man-to-man coverage thing, right? Like, that is something that to me feels like maybe there's still hope for Kyer Elam on this team and what he can do for this team. Because he's definitely more of a man-to-man corner than he is his own corner. Victor Ubelis says, S tier? Damn, I hope so. From your lips to God's ears, right?
Yeah, me too.
Peter Wilson says, if they were magically switched in Buffalo and KC wins every single Super Bowl they've been to and get to and win it every year, and they haven't been in it. Allen is better than Mahomes, full stop. Sure. I don't know. That's your thought, man. Quintessifus Bookie says, need to have some players step up, some drafted, some who have been here. I mean, Kyer Elam being one of those guys. Like, I feel good about Rasul Douglas. I feel good about Taron Johnson. I like Christian Benford, but I like Christian Benford more in a zone scheme than I do a man-to-man scheme. I like Kyer Elam more in a man-to-man scheme than I do a zone scheme. So, something's got to happen there. Something's got to break there. RJ, our resident doomer, says, no way we are S tier, maybe more like hoping for a playoff spot.
Come on, RJ.
Chris Janky says, what's up, David Hansel? What's up, Chris? Charles G says, schedule dropping on Thursday. I think that's what's happening. I'm like 99% sure it's what's happening, but I don't know. Let's see. Victor also says A tier with potential to prove more with this new roster and playbook, but to be S tier, the top with half new players is tough for me to digest. I get that. I understand that thought process. I think that when you look at some of those departures, right? Like Tre'Davious White was played for a month. It was a good month, and we'll always have that month. But they found a way to make the defense work without Tre'Davious White. They made the defense work without Matt Milano. They found a way to work around the fact that Stephon Diggs basically had next to zero production in the second half of the season on offense. Like, they found ways to win, even with guys that, like, got kind of exited out, right? Like, I don't... It is what it is. And they had to offload some things. They had to think about the future and not just think about doing what's best for 2024. But you could still win in a reloading type of year like we just saw Kansas City do, right? Like, it's more than possible.
Yeah, and I think one thing too is, okay, let's say we don't put the Bills in S tier, then I don't want to hear any team but the Chiefs be there. And I can make arguments that the Chiefs have some major deficiencies on their roster, and we saw major deficiencies last year. They still won the Super Bowl, obviously, which still sucks. But I can make that same argument about the Bengals. I can make it about the Ravens. I can make it about the Texans. I can make it about every other team in the AFC. So unless you're comfortable saying the Chiefs are the only team that should be in S tier, no one else should be, then the Bills have to be up there, because the Bills top to bottom, their roster stacks up with anybody's, including Kansas City's. And I know that we lost a ton of veteran talent, a ton of names that we've had in Buffalo for quite some time. But I'm looking at the roster, and probably the two worst starters are David Edwards and Taylor Rapp. If that's my two worst starters on this roster, there's not many teams in the NFL that can say something like that.
I 100% agree. All right, I think that's enough about the Bills. We will talk about the Bills plenty more this offseason. That is half of the reason, if not the entire reason why we're here. But on days like today, that's not the only reason why we're here. So, where do you want? I'm going to stick in the AFC East. Where do you want to go? Actually, no. Actually, let's not do it by division. Let's do it by tier. So, give me another Super Bowl contender.
I mean, the Chiefs. So let's get them out of the way.
Let's do the Chiefs. So, we'll switch that around. I'll put the Chiefs ahead of the Bills. I feel fine doing that. So, the Chiefs, very annoyingly, won the Super Bowl again in a year that they really shouldn't have been able to win this Super Bowl. This was a team that lost on Christmas Day at home to the Raiders. Mm-hmm. The Raiders, where Aiden O'Connell was playing quarterback. I still cannot reconcile that fact with the fact that they actually won the Super Bowl. It does not compute in my brain still. But it happened, and it sucks, and it stinks. But I don't really. Here's the thing. So, Kansas City's defense I still feel really good about. Even though they lost L'Jarius Sneed, and he is a very important part of how that defense plays. I still feel really good about the defense. And I think that Trent McDuffie took a huge step forward last year and was a critical part of what they did. Chris Jones is back again. George Karlaftis is a solid player for them. Their linebackers are a little all over the place. They have a bunch of guys there. I don't know if there's necessarily a big standout, but at the end of the day, this is still a very well-coached team on both sides of the ball, and they've got plenty of talent. But let's talk about the offense for them. Travis Kelce is a year older, just got a new extension. Can still do what he absolutely has to do. Has the ceiling been capped a little bit by age and athleticism falling off? Yeah, I think you can see that happening during last year. He just doesn't have that same ability to, break away from tackles. He's a bit more of that, just possession guy that Mahomes can rely on. Which is good because you look at the additions that they made to their wide receivers. First of all, they kept Marquez Valdes-Scantling for some reason. I'm still not 100% sure the thought process behind that. Same with Kadarius Toney. Don't know why you're keeping him on the roster. I really can't figure that out either. But you do add Hollywood Brown, and then you draft Xavier Worthy in the first round. Okay, so I think there's potential for both of those guys. They definitely bring a lot of big play potential. But in some ways, they almost feel redundant of each other. Mm-hmm. Am I wrong in that? Hollywood Brown is a very one-dimensional, deep threat type of receiver. You chuck it up deep for him, you let him run underneath it, and he'll probably come down with the ball, right? But for Xavier Worthy, it almost feels like the same thing, right? This is somebody that first of all, you have to scheme both of these guys open, right? Both of these guys have to be schemed open. You can't just set them on the line and forget about what they do. Chris Jenke is fact-checking me. They cut Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Good. That makes sense. That makes a lot more sense. And it should be noted that they do technically still have Rashee Rice on the roster. What that means, given his current legal situation, is to be seen. So I'm not gonna include him in much of the conversation right now. But with Xavier Worthy, very thin receiver, right? That's one of the big concerns with him. He's 6'1". He ran a 4.2 140, blazing fast. This is somebody you could see we can sit here and talk about a 40-yard dash not being super relevant, but
that's insane.
It first of all is an insane number, and also it shows up when you watch him, right? You see breakaway game-changing speed when you watch Xavier Worthy on tape. That's reality, right? And so those things connect and they mesh. But he is also a generous 172 pounds, right? This is a thin guy. And, some people might say, well, is this going to be like a Deshaun Jackson, or is this going to be like a John Ross? there's also a reality where this is like a Tutu Atwell, right? Who is also super short and small, and again has to be schemed open. And is Tutu Atwell like a game breaker? Like, he had some good games last year for the Rams, but wasn't like incredible for them either. So I still have questions about the Chiefs wide receiver group. I think they're better than what they were last year because it's easy to be better when the bar is like in the basement, right? But there's still like a lot of question marks with the wide receiver room in particular for me.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, just looking at the Chiefs roster, I can draw so many parallels to the Bills, especially on the offensive side. If you just, let's hypothetically say Rashee Rice is playing the entire season. So Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman. Like, I think that those are pretty much even. I guess you could say Rashee Rice has shown more than Khalil Shakir, which is true. But I think you could also say Curtis Samuel has shown more than Marquise Brown. So I think they're pretty even there. You got Isaiah Pacheco, you have James Cook, very different players, but still productive in their own rights. And then Travis Kelce, look, he's in the argument for greatest tight end of all time. Yes. But like you said, he's starting to hit that kind of cap. Father Time's slowly catching up with him. He's still very good and still one of the best tight ends in the league.
He's still smart enough to know how to get open. That's what matters for him right now.
But I think Dalton Kincaid in the opposite direction is ascending right now. So I can basically look at those skill players and I could say the Bills and the Chiefs are in the same boat right now. And then Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, QB1, QB2 in the NFL. Like, there's some really legitimate parallels. And then you can even go to the offensive line and have the same conversation. I think the Bills are in basically the same spot as the Chiefs offensively. Defensively, I'd probably give the edge to Kansas City right now. And coaching-wise, it's hard to not give it to them.
You look at the Chiefs' offensive line in particular, there's still questions about both tackle spots, right? Like, left tackle is definitely a question mark. Right tackle is a question mark. They paid Jawan Taylor a bunch of money to be the most penalized player in football last year. By like,
he deserved more too.
Man, it was tough. And it was so funny, like, just right out of the gate, he just kept. It wasn't so much like the initial jump, right? Like, that's a thing that some of these guys do. It was the fact that he was so far back into the backfield that it was just like, what are you doing, man? Like what? It's so funny how their season started with Jawan Taylor being the center of attention, and lining up incorrectly in the backfield, and then one of their biggest moments was taken away by Kadarius Toney lining up too far ahead of the line of scrimmage. There's just something funny. It's just like very, very. Listen, it's a game of inches, it's a game of details, and sometimes it costs you big in those moments. And I think that when you look at tackle, like, Jawan Taylor does not inspire a lot of confidence. They had Donovan Smith last year play left tackle for them at times, along with third-round pick Wanya Morris. Like, I like Wanya Morris as a draft prospect, but he didn't necessarily show anything last year to make me think, like, this is somebody that's going to take the next step and be like the franchise left tackle. And there's nothing that Jawan Taylor showed me last year to make me feel comfortable in his abilities either. They drafted Kingsley Suamataia from BYU, okay, but that's another guy that needs work, right? Like, this, you're looking at another guy that needs work. So both of these tackle spots are big question marks in my mind, and I don't feel those same question marks about the Bills. You can maybe say that this new center left guard combo of David Edwards and Connor McGovern is sort of that question mark. And I get that, but like, Connor McGovern has at least shown to be like a stabilizing force for an offensive line. Even if he's not like the best player on this offensive line, he's good enough to make things work. And I think you could say the same about David Edwards, historically speaking. Like, he has started on a Super Bowl team with the Rams. He has been a part of some very successful playoff teams with the Rams. He was part of last year's team and played well when he was that extra guy. So I don't feel that same level of, like, unconfidence, which is not a word. I was trying so hard to think of an actual word, and I could not think of an actual word. But I don't feel that same level there as I do with the Chiefs tackle situation. Again, this may not matter because Mahomes is who he is, Andy Reid is who he is, and they'll just kind of find a way to work around it. But it is a problem, and it's a problem that may end up costing them a game. It may end up costing them a playoff game, potentially. That's the thing. You can work through a lot of problems, especially in the regular season. Once you get into the playoffs, it becomes a lot harder to work around different problems. BK says Chris Jones is blowing through McGovern. Spin also says Chris Jones is blowing through anyone. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with all of that. Like,
that's why you don't single Chris Jones.
Right, that's the thing,
it's not
right?
just
Like,
Connor McGovern that's going to be blocking Chris Jones. It's two players, maybe three.
yeah, like that's the thing. And that's why it's also important to have comfortability at tackle as well, right? Like, you have Deion Dawkins, who, also kind of got blown through by Chris Jones when he got put at edge against Dawkins in a critical moment. But, I still feel better about Deion Dawkins than I do Jawan Taylor. I feel better about, Spencer Brown. I kept thinking of Eric Pierce. Why was I thinking of? I know they both wore the same number, 79, and they're both like really tall white guys from Iowa. But like that was some rough muscle memory, man. That was bad. I don't want to think about Eric Pierce again. But Spencer Brown played much better last year than he has throughout his career, and I feel like he'll take another step forward. So I think that the Chiefs are ahead of the Bills. I feel comfortable saying that. I think I'm fine saying that. But there's definitely a chance for the Bills to find a way and to usurp the Chiefs and maybe take the AFC title. But they are not the only ones. Are there any other teams you want to put in the Super Bowl contender category?
Oh, man. So this is, I mean, I have to put the Ravens there. And you can disagree with me.
No, I'm with that.
They're so talented, man. It's just in the playoffs, the Lamar Jackson thing in the playoffs is real, and it's not spectacular at all. But they're so damn good, man. That roster is insane.
Yes.
They're gonna compete for the 1 seed the entire year, so you have to have them in the S tier, competing for a Super Bowl.
So, how much of their problems in the playoffs is Lamar Jackson, and how much of it is John Harbaugh? Because there's been so many issues with Harbaugh in the playoffs. Like, I can't think of a great Ravens playoff win since their 2012 Super Bowl against the Niners. I mean, they've had a couple of nice moments, I suppose, but nothing where I'm like, oh yeah, that's and again, some of that has to do with Lamar and not performing the way that they want him to rather. Some of that is also Harbaugh. I mean, I go back to that 2019 team where they were 14-2. They were far and away better than every other team in the AFC that year. They were a juggernaut that year. And then they get into the playoffs, and they did everything they could from a coaching standpoint to give that game away to the Titans. They kept blitzing Derrick Henry, which made no sense at all, and Derrick Henry punched them on the ground. And then on offense, once they got behind, they just started throwing and throwing and throwing for no reason at all, other than they just panicked because they were behind early, instead of just running the ball, even though they were the best rushing team in the NFL that year. Again, by far. And then you look at this year, it feels a lot similar in how they went out. It was just they panicked, they didn't run the ball, they got behind early, and the funny thing is, their best coach on that staff, which is Mike McDonald, found a way to adjust. They shut out the Chiefs in the second half on defense. And then the offense still couldn't do enough. Despite an incredible defensive performance by them in the second half. Well, guess what? Mike McDonald is gone. He's no longer there to kind of help save your ass. So what's going to happen here when you have to really push yourself into that position? There's nothing to this team. And I like this team. I like John Harbaugh a lot. I like Lamar Jackson a lot. I like how this team is constructed. I really do. But you just get that sense that I think a lot of their fans have. It's a feeling that I think a lot of Bills fans are familiar with now, where it's like, what's going to happen? How are we going to give this game away?
Yeah, see, the thing is, I think a lot of fans that aren't Ravens fans, aren't Bills fans, they think that what Josh Allen is in the playoffs is what Lamar Jackson is in the playoffs. I don't know why there's still this weird narrative that Josh Allen chokes in the playoffs.
It's very weird.
He doesn't. It's very clear. He's one of the best statistically and literally, just watch him play, quarterbacks in postseason history. Like, you're completely right. The way that the Ravens have gone about coaching the playoffs has always been a disaster. And this year, even I forgot who was announcing the game, was even saying at one point, like, why aren't they running the ball? What is happening right now?
It didn't make any sense, especially when you saw what the Bills did the week before, controlling the line of scrimmage from what they get. This is what they could have done, and they just said, no, that's not what we're going to do. In some ways, it almost felt like they were, kind of buying into and trying to push against narratives, which is really just me armchair psychoanalyzing, so don't take what I'm saying too seriously. But, man, it really felt like they were trying so hard to prove that Lamar Jackson could, do this single-handedly.
Yeah.
And it really did not make any sense to pass nearly as much as they did. You had to just run the ball a little bit more. It didn't have to be, completely flip the script or anything. But, something's got to give here, man.
Yeah, the thing is, I think the Ravens and Bills are in similar spots a little bit. I think the Bills are slightly ahead just over the past few seasons because the Bills are progressing further and their quarterback has shown something in the playoffs, but both have that looming question that's going to be over the top of them all season. It's like, yeah, you win in the regular season, that's fine. But when you get to the playoffs, can you beat the big bad Chiefs? And
right.
I have more confidence right now that the Bills can do it than the Ravens can. Lamar Jackson has now played in 6 playoff games. He has exactly 1 playoff game where he has more touchdowns than turnovers. Like, he's got to be – John Harbaugh aside, the coaching staff aside, the other players on that team aside, Lamar has to stand on his head at some point and actually play a legitimately great playoff game outside of beating the Texans 34-10 in the first round this season. Like, he needs to play better, but this team is still so freaking stacked that I just can't pull them out to say they're competing for just a playoff spot. No, they're competing for a Super Bowl.
I agree. I agree with that. Yeah, and it's tough because you look at they haven't necessarily given a ton of really valuable help like a wide receiver necessarily. Yeah. They've done better in the last year or so, right? Like Zay Flowers is turning out to be a great pick, probably one of their best first round picks in a while, if we're being honest, right? Like, this is a great pick for them on offense. There's potential for someone like Tez Walker, right? Who they took in the 4th round last year. Some people don't necessarily love him. I get it. I understand it. I think there's still potential with him there. There's guys on this roster that I think can really do some good things for them. And I think another encouraging part, right? Like, they get Mark Andrews back, who he was in that AFC Championship, right? Am I remembering that correctly? He came back for the AFC Championship after he got hurt. Yeah,
probably Daquan Jones-esque would be my bet. Is that he was back, but was he
right? Yeah, that was sort of my thought. Is okay, they had Mark Andrews in the game, but was he really contributing in the game like they wanted him to? So. If Mark Andrews stays healthy, that's another dynamic that they did not have in the playoffs, which does matter. And Isaiah Likely filled in really well for him last year, to the point where I was like, what year is he? How far into his rookie contract is he? Because that dude might get paid at some point real soon. That was so there's guys on this roster. There's plenty of players on this roster. They still have good coaches, I think. But it's tough. And it's going to be tough, and I don't really know what to expect from this team other than they're going to be very, very good. I just don't know how far that's actually going to end up taking them.
Are you comfortable with them in S?
Yes, I'm comfortable with them in S because in a similar sense with the Bills, right, where I'm not 100% sure where they might end up going or where their cap is. It's still a Super Bowl type of team. All three of these teams, I could legitimately see winning the Super Bowl. Are there any other teams that you feel potentially putting into the S Super Bowl contending team category tier?
For me, there's only two teams that I would even think about, suggesting could be there. I don't have either of them there.
Okay.
Do you want the two teams?
Yeah.
The Bengals and the Texans.
Okay. So I don't feel comfortable putting the Texans there yet.
Mm-hmm.
I could see the logic behind it. I get it. I understand. I'm not going to push back too hard if someone feels like they could be. This is probably the best Texans roster ever, right? They're a young enough team where I could probably say that in a real sense, where that this probably is the best Texans team ever put together right now. But it's still they're a young team and a young coaching staff. I think it's going to be tough for them to get all the way through. I mean, you're going to have to go through at least one, if not two, of these teams at the top here to get to a Super Bowl for the Texans.
Yeah. And
I don't know if that's possible.
There's an important note to it, too. And this is something I kind of started looking into a little bit last year after the Texans game against the Jets when CJ Stroud was an absolute disaster. And before people want to say, well, it was pouring rain out. My God, what could CJ Stroud have done? Zach Wilson outdueled him that game, man. Zach had a good game, so I don't want to hear that the weather is too bad. If you go and you compare the splits, CJ Stroud in a dome versus CJ Stroud outside in the playoffs, in the NFL, I'm not talking about his college days. Mm-hmm. In the NFL, he's significantly worse outside.
Fascinating.
And to me, that should be a major concern if you have to go to Kansas City, if you have to go to Buffalo, if you have to go to Baltimore. All three of those places, the weather can be a little rough. I don't have any reason yet to trust CJ Stroud outside. And it's a very, very real thing. If you, like I said, go back through, look at his games outdoors, he never really was great. He was always great indoors.
That is something worth noting. Obviously they're an indoor team, right? They play in a dome in Houston. So the majority, or at least most of their games are going to be indoors, right? And especially when you consider they play in the AFC South, which obviously has the Colts. They have a dome. Odds are some other team that they'll be playing against will be in a dome. So I think that it's very possible for them to find a way through. Maybe they get a little bit higher seeding than maybe they should based on some other factors. Maybe they just find some things rolling their way. I hesitate putting them in the S tier, though. I think they are probably near the top of the A tier, but I'm not going to put them in the S tier.
I'm with you on A, for sure.
So let's put them in the A tier. What about the Bengals?
Oh, my goodness. Man, so the Joe Burrow thing, his injury concerns are very serious to me. And it's not just because of the injury last year. It's because he consistently has gotten hurt throughout his professional career, whether you go back to his rookie season or last year. And it's all different places too, right? He blew out his ACL, if I'm saying that right, his rookie season?
Yes, yeah, his rookie year.
And then last year, heading into training camp, he had that pretty rough Achilles issue or calf issue, what have you, that really hampered him early on. And then now he blows out his wrist. The injuries are concerning, and the fact that now Tyler Boyd isn't on the team, which is, I know, not as big a deal as T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. But now you don't have that three-headed monster. Maybe Jermaine Burton is a dude, but I want to see how Joe Burrow comes back. I want to see how their offense works through that situation. I want to see how Zach Moss plays for this team. And then on the defensive side, I want to see how that secondary holds up. There's just way more questions for the Bengals than there are for the Bills, for the Ravens, for the Chiefs.
I think an underreported storyline from last year is just how big of a regression the Bengals defense took last year.
Yeah.
They were terrible against the run. They were just not good against the run, period. And they've got some talented guys on defense. We've seen plenty of guys on that defense play well. And, having BJ Hill, having Sam Hubbard, who's been there for a while, Trey Hendrickson. But there's definitely some discontent, it seems like, right? Like Trey Hendrickson is asking for a trade or a new contract, or he's threatening to retire. None of that really makes sense to me, and I don't think this will actually turn into anything. But obviously you also have T. Higgins, who's wanting a new deal or to, be traded. So there's the kind of, as Chris Jank, he says, I really think the thing that will hold the Bengals back the most are their front office and their owner. I mean, we talked about that with Max Toscano on our draft coverage about T. Higgins, and he's just like, yeah, this is just what they do, and it's dumb, and basically from another era of contract negotiation and football management, but this is just what they do, and it's true. This is just what they do. Another kind of unreported or under talked about thing, especially when it comes to their defense in particular, they drafted Miles Murphy in the first round, and he did nothing for them last year. Like, genuinely nothing for that team last year. I could not tell you a single thing that guy did to help that team last year. Cam Taylor-Britt, I think, is a good corner. DJ Turner is a solid number 2, I guess. Mike Hilton is still there, and he's definitely a big part of how aggressive that defense can be. Yeah. Dax Hill playing at safety. Like, there's guys on this team. But it's concerning that they played as poorly as they did basically throughout a lot of that season. It wasn't even just through the Burrow injuries. It was just like through most of the season, they just weren't a very special defense. Yeah,
you couple that too with... See, the one thing that's really interesting to me about the Bengals is Jake Browning played pretty damn well for them for the entire season, to a point where it's like, I don't want to say, I'm not saying Joe Burrow's bad. I'm not saying Joe Burrow's bad.
I know what you're trying to say. Yeah. I know what you're trying to say. And I'm going to push back. Not even just about like talking about is Joe Burrow overrated because Jake Browning played well. I think when you look at this Bengals coaching staff in particular, I understand that for most people, you didn't pay attention to the Bengals until they became good with Joe Burrow. I'm not criticizing. I understand that. They were a irrelevant team that did nothing. I get it. That's fine. I'm not trying to squash anyone's vibes or anything. But when you look at the first 2 years with Zach Taylor, right? He found a way to win games with like 5 or 6 different quarterbacks. That included Andy Dalton. That included Brandon Allen. It included Ryan Finley somehow. Like Joe Burrow as a rookie as well. Like that second year when Joe Burrow was a rookie after he got hurt, they had Ryan Finley. They won a game with him. They had won a game with Burrow. And then they ended up winning a game with Brandon Allen. And they did it by playing to those guys' strengths. I think when you look at what they did with Jake Browning this past year, it was still the Bengals offense. It was just more quarterback friendly because they knew that Jake Browning is not Joe Burrow and he's not going to do Joe Burrow things. Yeah. So they tried their best to help him. What I would like for them to do is have that same mentality for Joe Burrow. I don't understand why. Listen, I understand the thought process of trying to make things easier for your backup quarterback. I get that. You should want to do that because your backup quarterback, theoretically, should not be as good as your starting quarterback. But you shouldn't, I don't want to say go out of your way to make things difficult for your starting quarterback, but there's got to be a better way of going where you can find a sort of happy medium where you're still doing difficult things, because if you're doing a difficult thing, that means you're making the defense have to defend a difficult thing. And that's hard for them to do every game consistently through 60 minutes. But on the other side of that, you can't just have all the hard things happen. You have to be able to give your quarterback some help from a schematic standpoint. And I don't think the Bengals did that enough last year. Part of that's because their run game just did not exist either for them, right? Like, Joe Mixon had a few halfway decent games. I think one of them may have been against the Bills. I couldn't even tell you if he had a great game against the Bills.
I don't remember.
Yeah, like, and I think Zach Moss will be better than Joe Mixon was. I really do. I think that will probably end up looking like a much better signing than a lot of other signings this offseason when it comes to running back in particular. But for like relative to the money that was spent, I'm really struggling about where to put this team. Part of me wants to put them in the top of the A tier, like ahead of the Texans, but not quite above where the Ravens are.
I think you kind of hit on a point earlier here about the vibes there almost seem a little rough right now. Whether it's T. Higgins or Trey Hendrickson or who knows what Jamar Chase is thinking. He's thinking all sorts of things, I'm sure. There's some weird vibes going there, and I think that vibes have some sort of impact on teams. I'm just – something seems off about this team right now where I don't love them.
And you know what? Vibes don't matter when you're winning most of the time. Winning changes a lot of things. But right now, I think that we kind of have to put them at the top of the A tier, not quite at the S tier at the moment. So I feel comfortable doing that. All right. Are there other? Where do we want to go for the A tier from here?
So,
because to me, this is going to be a very crowded A tier in my mind.
Okay, so you're willing to put a good amount in. So if you're willing to put a good amount of teams in the A tier, oh man, who are you sure you're going to put there? Dolphins or Jets, if either of them?
With the obvious caveat that Aaron Rodgers has to stay healthy, which I'm going to assume happens, right? Yeah. I'm not going to assume that he's gonna get hurt again. It might happen, it could happen, and it probably will. But I'm not going to actually predict that that's going to happen. So if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, I think they are definitely a playoff team.
Yes.
Okay.
Team stacked roster.
Yeah. Do you think they are better than the Texans or the Bengals, though?
No, because I like the quarterbacks on those two teams better.
I think that's fair. All right. So let's talk about the Jets. Very interesting team. Even though they're largely the same team that they were last year, right? Like, this is, they are basically looking at this year and thinking, this is what 2023 was supposed to be, right? Like, they really believe in Aaron Rodgers being this guy. They still have Garrett Wilson, who is still one of the best receivers in the NFL, and if Rodgers stays healthy, I think Garrett Wilson will have, like, a, ginormous monster breakout crazy season, like to the point where figure out what your floor is for him in your fantasy draft, because that might end up being a steal among your home leagues. They still have I keep waiting for this Robert Saleh defense to just not be as good, and it just hasn't happened yet, and so I'm going to stop predicting that it's going to happen, because it's basically been the same defense since he's gotten there, right? Like, they're not super reliant on turnovers. They don't even get a lot of turnovers, but they're just so fundamentally sound. They're so strong on the back end in terms of coverage. They have a deep rotation on defensive line, and Quincy Williams and CJ Mosley. CJ Mosley is at this point starting to feel like an ageless wonder.
Yeah.
Where, like, he just does everything he needs to do. And he's not some, like, perfect linebacker in today's NFL. There's a few deficiencies in his game, and part of that has to do with, the limited athleticism, which was a concern coming out of college for him. But he's so smart. He is so smart, and he knows exactly where to be at the right time, and he knows how to like police the defense to where he gets everyone else set up exactly where they need to be, right? Like, there is a real legitimate guy there in CJ Mosley, and he's somebody that will continue to age well in a similar way, like how you see Demario Davis play with the Saints, where it's like he's a little bit older than CJ Mosley, I think, and he is still just putting out great tape, and despite his age at that position. This defense is good. This is a very good defense. It will continue to be a very good defense, and I will continue to believe in them. Are they a little predictable? Kind of. They enjoy their blitzes on third down. They play a lot of, I don't want to even say similar coverage, but it's nothing that they haven't done in previous years under Saleh, right? Like, they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They're just playing super sound, intelligent, smart coverage and defense as a whole. The offense, though, man.
Yeah.
It's... you go. I've talked enough.
For people that don't know this, to me, Aaron Rodgers is the greatest quarterback I've ever watched play football. He's just phenomenal. When he was in his prime, he was phenomenal. He's not in his prime anymore, and he hasn't been for quite some time.
Sure.
And by quite some time, I mean 2022 was when we already saw him starting to fall off the cliff. He had essentially the worst season of his entire career. And then he gets traded to the Jets. The Jets get him. He plays 4 snaps. He tears his Achilles, and now he's coming back. He's not coming back from being the MVP, the 2-time reigning MVP.
Right.
He's coming back from not being very good. Not being very good for Aaron Rodgers is still being better than Zach Wilson. Is he going to be better than Zach Wilson this year if he plays the entire year? 1 billion %, yes. I don't think he can possibly be worse than Zach Wilson. But he's not going to be better than Josh Allen. I don't think he's going to be better than Tua. Like, he'd probably be the 3rd best quarterback in the division, and that's good enough for the Jets right now. They're only going to be able to go as far as he can take them, though. It's not going to be like Breece Hall is going to run for 2,000 yards and carry this team like Adrian Peterson did for the Vikings back when Peterson won MVP. It's all that comes down to Aaron Rodgers, but again, I can't put them ahead of the Bills just because there's some other weird things. Their offensive line, I like the signings in isolation. Tyron Smith, future Hall of Famer. John Simpson, good guard. Morgan Moses, a solid right tackle. And then they drafted, I forgot the name of the player they drafted in the first round.
It's Olu Fashanu.
Oh, Olu Fashanu. Yeah, so he probably going to, I don't know if he's going to swing or he'll take the job from Morgan Moses. Elijah Vera Tucker, Joe Tippmann. Like, they have that offensive line on paper sounds really good. But what happens when the first blow occurs and they lose Tyron Smith? Like, who are they going to put the rookie in? Let's say Vera Tucker goes down. Then who's it going to be? Max Mitchell, Wes Schweitzer? Like, they're one injury away from having an absolute meltdown on that offensive line. And if that offensive line melts down, that entire team melts down. And you look at the team like the Bills, yeah, there's some question marks about their depth. I feel more comfortable about the Bills' ability to come back from an offensive line injury because I know that Josh Allen can escape. I know he can get away. Aaron Rodgers isn't escaping at this age and after that injury.
Yeah, and, I can look at this roster and I can feel excited about, if I'm a Jets fan, the fact that this roster looks great. Like, it genuinely does look like a great roster. It's also very thin. And especially on offense, you cannot sit here and sell me on Nate Hackett as your offensive coordinator.
Oh, that too, yeah.
Like, you saw it last year, and you could kind of sort of point to Aaron Rodgers' injury happening because of how Nate Hackett runs his offense, and I think Aaron Rodgers even kind of like implied that to a point. But also, like, Aaron, buddy. The only reason Nate Hackett is here is because you wanted him here, right? Like, you can't just sit here and be like, oh, well, if we did this, if we did that, if we didn't, have, like, empty set protections or something, it's like, you could change that because he's just your buddy, essentially, right? Like, this is your offense. That's the whole point of bringing Nate Hackett in. It's your offense. You can do with it what you want. That's why they had Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb on this freaking roster last year, despite the fact that neither of them contributed anything to that team. But if you if Aaron Rodgers is just not going to be 100%, and even if he is, I mean, what is the ceiling with that at this point, at his age, at this point in his career? I don't know, man. There's still enough on this roster, and even if he's only like above average, it's still more than good enough to get them a playoff spot, I think.
Yeah, I think they're a playoff team, and you know, I don't want to look. The Bills have injury concerns too. What's Matt Milano?
Right.
So when we're doing this exercise, it's really hard for me to say like, oh, he's going to get hurt. Like I don't think. I think even if he's healthy the entire year, I'm comfortable with them being an A, not being an S, not being an B. Like I think they're a very clear A team to me.
I agree. What other A teams are out there?
I've got one I would consider, but
Okay.
do you have any out there? Actually, no, I got two I would consider.
You got two. Okay. Is one of them the Steelers?
No, I'm not doing that again. I'm not doing that again. No, I'm done. They broke my heart last year.
But they proved you right, mostly. Sort
Yeah,
of.
made the playoffs. Yeah.
They made the playoffs when they really shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I'm going to put a team out there. Okay, you said you have two teams.
I got two.
I think I have three teams that I'm willing to put
Ooh.
in the A tier.
I think I know what they are, but one
Okay.
of them I hate.
Okay, so for me, one of those teams is going to be the Browns.
Yeah, that's one of my two.
Okay. What's the other one?
The Dolphins.
It's the
Gotta
Dolphins.
be.
Okay.
Yeah.
What? Okay, so we have both of your two. What do you think my third one is?
Right where your cursor was going, the Jaguars.
The Jags?
Yeah.
Buddy, you're wrong. I
Oh
think
my-
it's the Colts.
It's the Colts. Oh, ooh.
It could be the Jags. I'm willing to put the Jags on there. I know, and we can talk about that. But let's before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go in the order that we put things here. So the Browns, right? They make the playoffs last year. They do it largely, almost entirely because of their defense, right? Like Jim Schwartz took that defense, took the talent that they've been accumulating there, and actually used it. They did so good defensively. They really struggled on offense, not just because Deshaun Watson is terrible both on the field and off the field, but also because they lost Nick Chubb so early in the season that they couldn't even lean on the run game at that point. Yeah. And beyond that, right, like they fired their running backs coach and their offensive coordinator in the offseason, I think largely because of that. Because this people talk about this like Shanahan style offense, which is what the Stefanski offense comes from, right? Like that's with his origin. He worked under Kubiak for a long time. He's familiar with that system. That's the type of offense that he runs. And when people talk about that, they always say like, oh, well, you can put any, like that's the offense that makes you think running backs don't matter, right? Like, because you can just put any running back in there and they'll make it work. And they tried to put any running back in there after Nick Chubb went down, and they didn't get like diddly poo out of it. Like they couldn't run the ball. They just couldn't run the ball effectively. They couldn't really do anything on offense, period, until Joe Flacco came off the couch and led them to the playoffs. I am not kidding you. When I heard and saw from friends, from people who cover the Browns online and other places, all basically say the exact same thing, which was Joe Flacco right now is playing the best quarterback play that the Browns have seen in my lifetime. Like and seeing that, first of all, is true and also frightening that's the case, right? Like that everyone could look at that and be like, oh, this is what a quarterback is supposed to look like?
Derek Anderson, 2007, and I had to look up the year. It was damn good for them.
Yes.
Joe Flacco might have been better last year.
Yeah. And like, Baker had a nice rookie year, but it was still like a rookie year where there was like there were limitations to him. Man, just a 38, 39-year-old quarterback in Joe Flacco who cannot move at all should not be the one trying to lead your team to the promised land.
Yeah. Man, see, here's the hard thing for me is I wonder now that it's going to be they're so stuck with Deshaun Watson. It's actually funny. And people always complain about, oh, what does Josh do in the offseason? He doesn't work hard enough. Meanwhile, Deshaun Watson's in Saudi Arabia doing God knows what with the prince of whoever. I wonder if Deshaun Watson, and I know they were 5-1 when he was playing, I put in quotes because he's not really doing much. I don't know if they make the playoffs if Deshaun Watson plays the entire year. And that's my biggest thing right now is like, as crazy as it is, old elderly Joe Flacco not being there this year, they've downgraded a quarterback to Deshaun Watson. It's mind-boggling.
So here's the other part of this, and this is why I brought up the coaching changes, because I don't think it extends just to the running back. I think that Stefanski is recognizing, because I always thought, all the other parts of the Deshaun Watson trade aside, and his contract that they gave him, I always felt like Deshaun Watson in that offense felt a little odd. It felt like an odd fit. Part of me felt like it was an odd fit. Part of me felt like, okay, but like this offense is made to help quarterbacks. It's not an overly complicated offense. Like this should be fine, even if I don't think it's a great fit. And I think that getting rid of Alex Van Pelt and bringing in Ken Dorsey in particular kind of signals to me that they're going to really overhaul this offense in terms of its style. And I will say, whatever anyone's thoughts about Ken Dorsey may be, the way people around the league view him is important. And I think it was Nate Tice, after he got fired, Ken Dorsey, that is. Nate Tice didn't get fired. He actually just took a new job. But after Ken Dorsey got fired, it was clear that the NFL thought pretty highly of Ken Dorsey in general. They felt like he did a good job of revamping the Bills' run game, which I would argue he did, in addition to Aaron Kromer, the offensive line coach. But that's part of it. Working with your offensive line coach is important to that. And they also felt like he did a good job with RPOs. I don't necessarily agree totally with that, but that is the angle. I think the RPO thing is a big part of Deshaun Watson's game when he was in Houston, right? Like, that was a big part of why he was successful in Houston. Not the only reason, obviously, but it was a big part of that offense when he was there. And I think bringing in somebody like Ken Dorsey, who has experience with different types of quarterbacks, and especially quarterbacks that kind of, do things on their own and are a little wild, like Cam Newton and Josh Allen. Now you have Deshaun Watson. I think that it's possible where Ken Dorsey, who is not going to be calling plays, obviously, because Kevin Stefanski does that, I think that there's a reasonable chance where Deshaun Watson improves and at the very least becomes a worthwhile quarterback, where they're not sitting there thinking, all right, who do we have to get now to save our season in the middle of the year, right? Like, but the other side of this, again, it comes down to injuries, right? Like, he has had numerous injuries throughout his career, several last year. Like, it's sort of like the Jets with Aaron Rodgers, but yeah, these two teams are honestly very similar in that a lot of it hinges around quarterbacks that are big question marks. And I think that it's tough. It's going to be tough for both of these teams. But with the Browns in particular, I don't know. There's, especially when you look in that division, which is so stacked and so heavy. I mean, we've got 3 of the 4 teams right here. I mean, it's the same thing with the AFC East, sure, but I don't know. This is tough. This is going to be very, very tough for them.
I think, like, if I'm going on paper right now, what I think the Jets are and what I think the Browns are, I think the Jets are better than the Browns because I think Aaron Rodgers is still better than Deshaun Watson. And I also like the pieces there, too. I don't know what Nick Chubb's going to be coming back from injury. When he wasn't hurt, he's arguably the best running back in the NFL. But Breece Hall is damn good, and we didn't know what he was going to be coming back from his injury, and he was still damn good. And so the Browns add Jerry Jeudy. I could see an argument that actually before we kind of talked through this, I wasn't going to put the Browns there, but I guess if I'm putting the Jets there, I have to put the Browns there. That they seem to just go together right now.
Yeah, they're very similar. High defensive teams. I would argue that I would say the Jets are better than the Browns. Like if I'm projecting for 2024, I would say the Jets are better than the Browns. I like Breece Hall more than Nick Chubb coming off an injury. Yeah. I like. Really, I think I like the Jets' offensive line better than I do the Browns' offensive line at this point. And losing Bill Callahan is a big deal. It's a big deal for them. Their offensive line coach, he goes to Tennessee to be with his son, who's the head coach there now. That's a big deal. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. We also probably should have mentioned that when talking about the Bengals, that they lost Brian Callahan, their offensive coordinator, to the Tennessee Titans and their job. All right. Let's talk about the Dolphins. Because we can talk about the Dolphins more in depth. However, I need you to convince me that they're not just going to have the exact same season for the third season in a row.
Oh man, I'm not going to do that because I don't think they're going to be as good.
Ooh,
and, yeah, I almost don't want to put them in B because I think it's almost unfair, but they're just look. Dolphins fans can say all they want. Oh, we got so much better. We're going to be better this year than we've been in ever. It's like, dude, who's playing for Christian? What are you doing for Christian Wilkins? You didn't replace him. Benito Jones is not Christian Wilkins. Tyler Tart is not. The quick shift that Dolphins fans have made for being like Christian Wilkins, one of the best players in the NFL, being like, we'll replace him with some dudes. No, he won't. That's not how you replace Christian Wilkins. Yeah. So when I look at their defense, that defensive line, I have a massive amount of questions about. I don't know if Jalen Phillips or Bradley Chubb can come back from their injuries. And then they drafted Chop Robinson and Muhammad Kamara, right?
Yeah.
Two smaller edge rushers.
Yeah.
So I'm like, there's something wrong here. I'm not buying the Dolphins being better this year than they were last year. I think that they're going to compete for a playoff spot. I think it's going to be hard in the AFC East. I almost am inclined to say that they're a B team. And don't Dolphins fans with OBJ, I was begging the Dolphins to sign OBJ. I didn't want him. I'm happy they did because it's just extra money they're throwing at a player I just don't think is very good anymore.
Yeah, OBJ has had a lot of injuries and like he can still play. It's just not at the same sort of level that you want when you think of Odell Beckham Jr. and his career, historically speaking. I found so they paid Bradley Chubb a big contract, which they didn't have to do. They didn't have to do that. Jalen Phillips is coming off an Achilles injury. Bradley Chubb is also coming off a torn ACL. You draft two edges who are both, like you said, both smaller in Muhammad Kamara and Chop Robinson. And I don't know, man. Like, what exactly? Like, this is also their third defensive coordinator in as many years with Mike McDaniel. They kept Josh Boyer from the Brian Flores era and kind of just felt like they were saying like, oh, well, the defense was great with Brian Flores. Josh Boyer helped a lot with that defense. So keep him, bring in Mike McDaniel. He'll make the offense better. And this is going to be like a great team. And they were okay. Like the defense wasn't even that bad, but Boyer ended up being made a scapegoat because of his style of play calling and being super aggressive. Which is funny because that's like the only reason why they were in that playoff game against the Bills was just the fact that their defense was so aggressive and forced Allen into making some really stupid decisions. Yeah. But like, then you bring in Vic Fangio, who obviously has a ton of respect around the league, has done a lot of great stuff around the league, has put together some really good defenses, but the narrative around Vic Fangio was this is not going to be a quick turnaround for this team
Yeah.
defensively. It's going to take some time. But if you commit to it, you'll end up with a really good defense because Vic Fangio knows what he's doing and he's good at what he does. Now, Vic Fangio is out because he, I guess, didn't really get along with enough of the players, and the players didn't really connect with him all that well, and he, I guess, wanted to be in Philadelphia more. And I don't blame him, honestly, if we're being real. Philadelphia has a ton of talent as well. But I don't... You're bringing in Anthony Weaver, who, again, a lot of respect in the NFL. He was getting looked at for multiple head coaching jobs. There's a lot of people that think very highly of Anthony Weaver. A third defensive scheme in as many years is tough. It is tough to... And it's not even, like, similar schemes either. That's the thing. These are not, like, what Josh Boyer was doing, running the Brian Flores, Bill Belichickian, like, aggressive, cover zero, heavy blitzes, like, totally different from what Vic Fangio is doing with more, like, condensed and tight fronts, and trying to stop the pass versus the run. And then Anthony Weaver, he's not been this is his first year as a defensive coordinator, as a defensive play caller. So I have no idea what kind of defense he's going to run. Is it going to be something like what Mike McDonald has been running but in the last 2 years in Baltimore? Is it going to be something different? Like, I have no idea. And it's probably going to take some time for him to figure out exactly what's going to work and what's not going to work. And if there's one thing I'm getting a sense of from what's been going on in Miami, time is a bit of a luxury for them. Like, they do not have time on their side. They want results. That's kind of why they, like, brought in Mike McDaniel in the first place. They felt like 10-6 and not making the playoffs was not good enough for them. And that's why that's not the entire reason, but it's part of why they fired Brian Flores. And you bring in Mike McDaniel, who's gone 10-7 in both of his years, made the playoffs, and immediately got bounced. So I don't know what to really expect from this team based on the moves that they've made. That makes me feel like they're ready to take the next step.
Yeah, I think their defense got worse, and their offense didn't get better. So, like, why should I think anything other than they're at best going to be what they were last season? In reality, I could pretty easily see them taking a step back. I think the AFC East is pretty clear, or should be ranked Bills, Jets, Dolphins, Pats. And now that as we talk through this, I don't know if they belong in A tier.
You don't want to put them in A tier? You don't want to do it? I'm okay with taking them out.
Yeah, put them in B.
Oh, let's put them in B. Oh, this is going on Twitter. This is because it's getting clipped and it's going on Twitter, and we're gonna start stuff tomorrow. All right. Okay, so the Indianapolis Colts. First of all, you do not agree with me on this.
I have a major reason. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Colts, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong. Okay. So the Colts last year, I think you actually tweeted this out once, where you basically said, like, this is the worst, like, halfway good team I've ever seen in my life, or something to that effect, basically.
Yeah.
And that was the pretty accurate way of putting it. They started off kind of interesting with Anthony Richardson showing, like, a lot of promise and using that crazy skill set that he has, but he got hurt and he had to get put on IR. His season ended early. They went with Gardner Minshew, who did some good things with them. Almost kind of sort of backdoored their way into the playoffs. Almost beat the Texans. Maybe they should have. That's a narrative that got lost to time a little bit. But they're an interesting team, and I think that they're a talented team as well. Chris Ballard had, like, the most Chris Ballard offseason Chris Ballard could possibly have, which is they had a bunch of free agents that they liked that were set to, or guys that were set to become free agents from their team, and he re-signed basically every single one of them, and then added, who was it? Raekwon Davis from Miami. Yep. And then in the draft, they just, stayed at their spot. They got Leatu Latu in the first round, and then they got, guys like Tanner Bortolini, Matt Gonzalez, A.D. Mitchell, you know, it was just a very typical draft of Chris Ballard for them. They did Chris Schenke. That's a great point. They did add Joe Flacco. Important, very important to recognize. RJ also says, I would flip Miami and the Browns. I bet the Browns go 9-8. They're similar to a Bills drought team. I could see that. I still feel a little bit better about their defense than I do the Dolphins' defense, and that's kind of what moves the needle more for me at this point with that team, with those teams. But back to the Colts, right? Like, their defensive line is good. I like Tyquan Lewis and Dio Odeyingbo, Kwity Paye. I like DeForest Buckner, as he's getting a little bit older. Grover Stewart, even though he's a little bit older, is still playing well. Raekwon Davis is a good addition for them. Their offensive line played much better last year than they had in the previous 2 years, honestly. I think even if I don't love Gus Bradley as a defensive coordinator, I think that he is still getting enough out of them where I'm not necessarily going to ding them and be like, oh, well, Gus Bradley's their defensive coordinator. They're going to be terrible. And again, I feel like I'm saying this a lot. If the quarterback stays healthy, I think that this is a very difficult team to stop. If their playmakers are all healthy, if it stay healthy, Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, along with Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, A.D. Mitchell might be a solid contributor for them in year one. And even Alec Pierce, right? Like, there's guys in this team, and I think they can make it work. And I like Shane Steichen a lot as a play caller and an offensive coordinator and all that stuff. I think he did a really good job with them last year. I'm willing to project them forward as a potential playoff team. So, tell me why I'm wrong.
So, all good points. Just a couple things that I'm concerned with. I'll start with Jonathan Taylor. He's not the Jonathan Taylor I saw in 2021, whether I look at him statistically or whether I look at him on the field. And he's also got a weird health thing where he just can't stay healthy, essentially, ever since 2021. 2021, he has almost 2,200 yards. In the past 2 years combined, he has under 2,000 yards, and he's averaging around 4.4 yards per carry. That's fine numbers. Those aren't elite production that we thought we were going to get in a great Jonathan Taylor career. And he almost seems like a player to me that, again, is descending. He's not getting better. And to a point where Zach Moss basically outplayed him in Indy all of last year, or at least played on the same level as him. And I don't really think Zach Moss is a great running back. So I don't know what to think of Jonathan Taylor moving forward. I just don't think he's one of those dudes that can make an entire franchise. As for Anthony Richardson, I think that's a bigger one. If we project him getting better, and he has to get significantly better, but project him getting significantly better, yeah, this team's going to be dangerous, probably competing for a playoff spot. I have no idea what Anthony Richardson is. He barely played last year. I mean, he played – I'm just looking at his snap counts right now. He played 2 games where he was 96, 100% snaps, and then 2 games where he played a third of the game. So he really played the equivalent of about 2 2/3 football games in the NFL. They were fun. They were interesting. They weren't spectacular. I think the thing with Anthony Richardson for me is I can see him being this spectacular quarterback because he has all the tools a la Josh Allen, but does he put it together like Josh Allen did? Does he take a step in year 2 like Josh Allen did? Does he then proceed to take a step in year 3, 4, et cetera? I don't know what Anthony Richardson is. I don't think he has enough experience right now to kind of put this team on his back. But then again, he's freak when he runs. If he starts running, Jonathan Taylor takes off, yeah, I think they could be competing for a playoff spot. But I don't really think they're on the same tier. In my opinion, I don't think they're with the Bengals, with the Texans, with the Jets, with the Browns. I'm fine if you want to keep them in A. But like you said, it's a projection, right? It is a projection. They're gonna get better, yeah.
Yeah, I fully admit this is a projection. This is me kind of just throwing it out there, but just to kind of toot our own horn from last year when me and Kyle did this. We also felt like the Browns were going to be a playoff team, and that was definitely a projection. Like that was definitely like, hey, Deshaun Watson kind of is what hinges this, but this is a very good roster, and they could be pretty spicy as a team. And they were. That's exactly what happened. Like, even though Deshaun Watson was god-awful for them and non-existent, they still ended up being a playoff team. And I kind of get a similar, not identical. It's not the same. I don't feel as strongly about the Colts roster as I did the Browns roster last year, but I do feel way more confident in their quarterback, in Anthony Richardson than I did Deshaun Watson. So I
think they're in the right. Yeah. Like if we rank these teams in order, like Chiefs, Bills, I think they're in the right spot. I think that those three, the Browns, Colts, and Dolphins, I could kind of move them all around in different spots. I think that it makes sense where they are. Yeah.
I think that's very fair. All right. So that's enough out of the 8 here. So these are the teams that we are really projecting to be a playoffs contender. And I guess we can kind of put Miami in that conversation because we included them in the conversation, but these are the teams we feel best about. Moving on to blips on the radar. Do we want to talk about the Jags? Because I know you're itching to do it. I know you are.
I mean, you could put them there. I mean, they are crud, but if you want to put them in the B, feel free.
All right. So what's your beef? What's your beef with the Jags? Let's talk about this.
They're just simply not good, and Trevor Lawrence is not good. Until Trevor Lawrence literally is good, I'm going to continue saying he's not good because he hasn't been good in his entire career. He's been about average basically the entire time. I don't know why I should suddenly be like, oh, he's got Gabe Davis on this team. He's going to be great. No, dude, he is Trevor Lawrence. He's not a bust. No, he's a fine quarterback. No. Take him first overall. Tell me he's a generational talent. He hasn't been, but sure, whatever. He'll be fine this year. The Jaguars will probably go 8-9, 7-10, something like that, and we'll pretend like Trevor Lawrence deserves a $80 million a year contract. They'll sign him to it. Everybody will say, "Oh, look how smart the Jaguars are," and they'll proceed to be a 500 team for the rest of his career. So, yeah, I just don't think that they're great. I don't think they're good. I think they're fine, and probably B is where they belong. I think the Dolphins are significantly better than them. I'll say that.
You think the Dolphins are significantly better?
Oh, yeah. I think the Dolphins' offense is just Tyreek Hill is the best player on those two teams by a massive margin, and I think Tua is better than Trevor Lawrence in the situations they're in. In the situations they're in.
No.
Tua fits in that Dolphins scheme so freaking well. Trevor Lawrence is supposed to be on that tier of a Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, where you can put him anywhere. He's going to be great. He just isn't that dude in Jacksonville.
Still Tua better than Tua. Tua's like playing with training wheels on. Like, what are we doing here?
Hey, show me like Trevor Lawrence standing on his head at any point or making great throws. Like, I just don't see it consistently enough. I've seen Tua play decently from time to time, and I'm one of the biggest Tua haters. I've seen Tua play better than Trevor.
Wow. Okay. First of all, that playoff game against the Chargers was far better than any game that Tua has ever played in his life.
He threw 4 interceptions in the first half. He had one good half,
and then he came back.
Oh my god!
And he came back. Like what? Come on.
It was against the Chargers. The Chargers choke against everybody. They choke against everybody.
You're being so over the top.
I don't like
this is ridiculous. I understand that. There's a difference between not liking a player and saying that Tua is a better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence. Tua is not doing what Trevor Lawrence is doing. He's just not. He's literally not being asked to do what Trevor Lawrence is doing. Tua is given training wheels, and Trevor Lawrence is like riding a motorcycle after like a day after getting the training wheels off. Like
I can get where you're coming from there. I don't like the concept that Trevor Lawrence, people keep saying he has nothing around him. I do not get that.
I disagree with that. I disagree with the notion that he doesn't have anything. I think that, the offense wasn't good last year, and Lawrence was a part of that. But I also think that Calvin Ridley severely underperformed for his expectations. Christian Kirk, who is clearly Lawrence's favorite target, was hurt for too much of the season, especially near the end when they were really on the ropes and could not figure out anything offensively. Really, the biggest sin on offense for them has nothing to do with any of the players. It has to do with the fact that they're still keeping Press Taylor as their offensive coordinator, and I can't make sense of that. Doug Peterson is this close. He is this close. My fingers are, for those of you who are listening on audio, my fingers are very close together. Doug Peterson is this close to losing 2 different head coaching jobs because he is too loyal to Press Taylor. And I cannot for the life of me figure out why.
I mean, yeah.
He's just done nothing. Press Taylor has done nothing in his entire NFL career as a coach to make me feel like this is somebody worth going to bat for. This is somebody worth dying, giving up my career for, essentially. Because I have to stay loyal to Press Taylor because of what he does. I have no idea what Press Taylor does that makes Doug Peterson love him so much. I can't wrap my brain around it. It was the same thing in Philadelphia. It's the same thing in Jacksonville. He is so defensive of him. It doesn't make any sense to me. Their play calling is all over the place. I don't understand why they feel like this was the move that they did not have to make. They fired their defensive coordinator, who, they end up replacing with somebody that I like better in Ryan Nielsen. And I think that defense, this could be another one of these sort of like defensive heavy teams. They bring in Eric Armstead, who, yes, is older, but is still a very good player. Also has some injury concerns, but can be a very good player when he's healthy. Josh Allen, who they actually gave a big extension to, is a game-changing type of defensive player. Bringing in Mitch Morse, I think, will help stabilize their offensive line. Yeah, even a guy like Foye Oluokun is very, very good in my opinion. Chad Muma is not a bad player. Like there's guys on the defense that I feel good about, and I think that they will be better than what they were last year, because they started off good last year defensively, and then they just completely fell off a cliff in the middle of the season, along with the rest of that team, right? Like the entire team collapsed after the midpoint of the season. Really, once Jake Browning beat them on Monday Night Football, it was Dunyan rings. They were over
Dunyan rings. Oh,
Dunyan rings. And they just could not dig themselves out of the hole that they had put themselves in. I am willing to... God, I don't even know what to do with the Jags. I don't know whether to put them ahead of the Dolphins. I feel better about the Dolphins' offense as a whole, because I trust Mike McDaniel and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle more than what they have at those relative positions. But I definitely like Lawrence more than Tua. You can suck it on that one. And I feel better about their defense in general than I do the Dolphins' defense. So I'm willing to keep them there. I'm willing to keep this as it is while also acknowledging that it's very, very close. Again, for listeners that are not watching online right now, my fingers are very close. It's very, very close. God, I just it's not. We're revisiting this take when the season gets to an end.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Trevor's going to get his extension. Just you wait. Record-setting extension.
So will Tua, and Tua's will be I hope Tua does. And Tua's will be a much bigger mistake than Trevor's. So, all right. Are there any other B teams you want to put on here? I
have one more.
You have one more. Go ahead.
It's the Steelers, man.
Obviously. Steelers. I mean, there's literally no other team would I be willing to put. I don't even like putting the Steelers in this spot, but I'm not putting any of these other teams in that spot either.
So let me just say, the Steelers, the biggest issue they had last year has to be quarterback. Like, we have to be able to agree that Kenny Pickett was an absolute disaster.
Atrocious.
And then they had to rely on Mason Rudolph to essentially carry them to the playoffs, and they still made it. Russell Wilson is not a great quarterback anymore. He's not a good quarterback. He's probably slightly below average at this point. He's better than Mason Rudolph, and he's better than Kenny Pickett. And I like the idea of Justin Fields, even though apparently he might just be a kick returner. What the hell is that about? This team still has talented players on the roster, and that defense is going to be they're also going to go 9-8. They're not going to go under a 500. So I feel like they have to be here because they're just going to hang around all season and maybe make the playoffs.
It's so annoying knowing like how your season is going to go before it even happens. Right? Like the Steelers team is going to not be very good, all things considered. They will still have a winning record, and they if things just sort of fall their way, which they often do for the Steelers, they might just make the playoffs. It's dumb, it's annoying, and I hate it, but it's why Mike Tomlin has been there for, what are we on, season 15 now with him? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, this is the type of team they are. I like some of the things that they've done. Their draft, where they basically just said, we're going to have a better offensive line than anyone else. Right? That's their goal, right? Like I don't know if they'll be able to accomplish that goal, but they made a very big concerted effort to just get better on the offensive line and get as much youth and talent there to help whoever their quarterback will be, whether that's Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, somebody they draft next year, I don't know. But it's going to be a better situation for whoever the quarterback is than it was for Kenny Pickett as well.
And it's year 18 for Tomlin.
Good Mary and Moses. That's insane. 18 years. Imagine having a coach for that long. Imagine having one coach for your favorite team for that long.
What? Call me in 11 years when Sean McDermott's still the Bills.
You're probably right. Yeah, there's some good things, some good parts to the Steelers roster. Defensively, I don't love it. I don't hate it. I could probably just use that as my tagline for this whole team. I don't love it. I don't hate it. They're just kind of there, and they'll just keep competing and finding some dumb way to win. And it's who they are. It's what they do. I like that they drafted Roman Wilson. I like, George Pickens, obviously, I think has a better chance than what he had last year. I like some parts of this team. I just don't really feel super strongly about like them being some really great team that can be a competitive team where it really matters, and that's just how I feel about them.
Yeah, they're not winning the Super Bowl. Their upside is a round one playoff exit.
It's rough. It's gonna be another 9-8 type of season. RJ asks, Tomlin has to be the longest tenured coach now, right? Right?
Has to be. I couldn't even think of
with the same team,
yeah.
Right? Because Andy Reid has had more like consecutive seasons as a head coach, going from Philly to Kansas City, but obviously split between two teams. So yeah, I think that is correct. All right, so we're not putting any more B's. We're on to the C's. Who do you feel is crud on a stick?
The Chargers.
The Chargers. Oh, this seems. I'll be honest. This seems high for them. I don't really know what to do with the Chargers. So do you feel strongly about them being a C?
They got Justin Herbert, and I don't even love Justin Herbert, but they have.
You don't love Justin Herbert.
No, I don't. But he's. Can we say down bad for a team that has like? I don't know.
A legit quarterback? That's fair.
The roster's not great. The roster is not great.
It's real bad. And a lot of that has to do with Tom, what's his name? Tom Telesco being really bad, making some really bad roster decisions over the last few years with this team. It's just rough. Now, they managed to keep guys like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, who a lot of people thought were going to end up being cap casualties. I don't know what they have left in the tank, but at least they have them, right? As some measure of respectability for them. I really like Justin Herbert. I think that he is somebody who has been victimized by some really bad offensive coordinators, or let's say one bad offensive coordinator. Joe Lombardi was not good for him. And then, Brandon Staley certainly didn't help matters either. I don't I think Jim Harbaugh will be good for him. I think he'll give Justin Herbert a lot of confidence. I think he'll be a good fit for him. I just cannot get behind Greg Roman being on his fourth offensive coordinator job in the NFL. Twice with Jim Harbaugh. And once with his brother.
But he does have Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, who he also coached in Baltimore, which is quite interesting. And that team was pretty damn good. They just ran the ball down everyone's throats. So Justin Herbert doesn't even have to play anymore. They could play Easton Stick, and maybe they would. I don't know.
I can't. I don't know what to do with this team, man. They're not going to be a good team, but you have to at least do something to make people feel some measure of confidence, right? You have to provide some measure of hope if you're in this season. They don't have to be good, but like 7-10, being competitive in your division, maybe you give the Chiefs a scare in one of those games. I don't know.
Where do you think they finish in the AFC West?
Jeez. All right, so I think the Chiefs are first.
Yeah.
I think the Broncos are fourth.
Yes, the Broncos are fourth. Yes.
I think the Broncos are fourth. I kind of like the Raiders' defense a good amount. I kind of like what they do defensively. I like adding Christian Wilkins with Max Crosby. Yeah, I'm willing to say the Raiders finish second and the Chargers finish third.
So you would either have the Raiders ahead of them in the C tier or the Chargers down in the D. So the Raiders have to be in C or D.
Correct. I'm okay with that.
I really, really like Christian Wilkins, and I like that defensive line a lot.
The Raiders defense as a whole played really well once they fired Josh McDaniels, right? Like Antonio Pierce and Patrick Graham got that defense playing pretty well. They're both still there, obviously, and adding Christian Wilkins really changes how that defense can play. I don't know how good that defense is going to be, but I think it's possible that they're pretty darn good. And if nothing else, they're going to be irritating because Max Crosby is just a jackass, and so is Christian Wilkins. And, that
offense is going to be bad.
The offense is not good. The offense is definitely not good.
Zamir White or Alexander Madison. Their quarterbacks Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew.
It's Gardner Minshew. I'm not entertaining the idea that that Aiden O'Connell is going to be their week 1 starter. But they do have Jacoby Myers, who we both like. They still have Devontae Adams if he really wants to play for this team.
And the tight ends too.
And the tight ends, right? Like you've obviously got their second round pick from last year, Michael Mayer, who a lot of people liked. They got Brock Bowers in the first round this year. They even have Harrison Bryant, who was pretty well thought of when he came out as a receiving option, at least. Yeah. I think that look, I'm not going to pretend that Gardner Minshew is a good quarterback. He's better than Aiden O'Connell. And I think at the very least they will get something out of that offense. And will that be better than what the Chargers get? I don't know. But I think their defense will be better than what the Chargers is as well.
You put the Raiders in the C. You've talked me into it. And there's also another part to this. The Raiders always play the Chiefs hard. I don't know why.
They do.
The Raiders are to the Chiefs what the Jets are to the Bills.
Yes, 100%.
So, yeah, I'd put the Raiders ahead of the Chargers. So now I'd be hard-pressed to put the Chargers in down bad, though. They're close.
They're close. Do we want to put the Titans in between the Raiders and the Chargers?
Are you projecting Will Levis to be halfway okay?
I think so. Halfway okay seems reasonable to me. You're so unconvinced you don't want to do it.
I don't know if I can say that they're better than the. I'm trying to look at their I don't even know who's on that team besides like Jeffrey Simmons.
There's
they did get Calvin Ridley,
decent
DeAndre
players
Hopkins,
on this team.
Tony Pollard. Ugh.
Tony Pollard with Tajay Spears is a little redundant, but I think they're both decent players at running back. I like having DeAndre Hopkins. Sneed. They do have L'Jarius Sneed on defense. They still have Calvin. They brought in Calvin Ridley. They still have DeAndre Hopkins. If you really like Nick Westbrook-Akine, I guess that's something you could say. Chigo Okonkwo, not a bad tight end.
Yeah.
Not necessarily gonna like light up the scoreboard or anything, but like not a bad tight end. And you still have Jeffrey Simmons, who's a game wrecker. You have L'Jarius Sneed, who will, like, those two will help each other quite a bit. You bring in J.C. Latham at tackle to Peter Skoronski, who was their first round pick last year, right? Like, that offensive line will get better. That offensive line will get better just because Bill Callahan is their offensive line coach now. So, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and feel amazing. I'm not going to, like, pound the table for the Titans necessarily being like some crazy team, but I think they will be competitive. I think they will be good at times, but I don't think that they will be competing for a playoff spot necessarily.
They also have a really, really good punter too. So
that is true. Ryan Stonehouse, legit player.
Yeah, I don't know. You pick. I can't decide. I feel like I'm going crazy because I have the Titans and Chargers as the same team. This is blowing my mind right now.
I think they're a C team, and I think they're better than the Chargers. I can't sit. Listen. I like Justin Herbert a lot, and maybe I'm letting my like anti Jim Harbaugh, anti Greg Roman bias seep through too much. But like Lad McConkey, who I liked a lot coming out of this draft, is probably going to lead this team in targets at wide receiver, and I don't think it's going to be even close. And that's not what they should be doing at wide receiver. That they'll run the ball a lot, and that'll help, but relying on Lad McConkey as your like majority shareholder in your passing game is not a great idea, in my opinion. It's not going to help for this year. So, all right. So we have two teams and we have two categories. Do you want to put one in each, or do you feel fine putting them both in the D tier? Or the F tier? Maybe you feel like both of them are F failures. I don't know.
I've got one in each.
You have one in each. Okay, go on.
I got the Patriots in the D tier.
Okay.
And I got the Broncos, who are an unmitigated disaster, in the F tier.
Ooh. Okay, let's talk about the Patriots first, because I actually do want to talk about the Patriots.
So they're not a good football team. I think that
True.
Should be pretty obvious to most people that watched them at all a little bit last year, and then just looking at their roster, it's not good. But there's players, and there's some pretty damn good players, whether that's Christian Barmore, Kyle Duggar, I love. I wish I wanted him on the Bills so bad. Matthew Judon coming back. And then Christian Gonzalez was damn good before he got hurt last year. He was
so good for them last year.
Yes.
It was that was one of those picks where it was like, okay, I know we're kind of over how did they let this player end up on the Patriots? But like, that really was a steal for them last year that he ended up falling to them.
So you have a bunch of guys on defense that I know can make plays. We don't know what their defense is going to look like now with Bill Belichick gone and a new head coach. The offense is I mean, I don't even know what to say. It's bad. It's not good unless somebody thinks Drake May is going to be the greatest quarterback to ever step foot on a football field in his rookie season. This is a bad offense, but the defense can hang in there. I think the defense could be sneaky good and help them win a couple games they probably shouldn't win.
I think if there's something that they have going for them offensively is the fact that they probably don't even need to start Drake May right away because they have Jacoby Brissett. And having Jacoby Brissett like around Drake May is probably as good a quarterback mentor as you could possibly have. Mm-hmm. If like Jacoby Brissett will show this dude what the NFL is like in a good way. right? Like in a way that will actually benefit Drake May more than say what the Commanders are doing with Jaden Daniels, right? Like giving Jaden Daniels Cliff Kingsbury as his offensive coordinator does not make any sense to me.
Yeah.
But giving Drake May like Alex Van Pelt, who has worked with young quarterbacks before, giving him Jacoby Brissett as part of his quarterback room is a big part of that as well. So I guess I like the future of the Patriots more than I do the right now of the Patriots. I liked the fact that they are willing to invest at wide receiver, right? Like, even though they lost out on Calvin Ridley, they really only lost out on him because the Titans gave him a massive contract that I don't think anybody was really expecting him to get. And okay, so you pivot from that and you double down at wide receiver and you take Jalen Polk and you take Javon Baker, who, a lot of people like both of those guys, right? Like those were both picks that when they were made, I was like, those are both good picks. They signed KJ Osborne as well as a depth guy. They still have Demario Douglas, who is a pretty solid player for them last year. Despite all the problems on offense, he was like weirdly consistent for them at wide receiver last year. And they still have Kendrick Bourne, who can't really stay healthy, but is a good player when he is healthy. So I think that and I guess they still have Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah,
I guess he's still there.
For what that's
yeah. Hunter Henry is also there, and he's been a good player for them as well. Just a very like if you were to like construct what a tight end should look like, it would probably look a lot like Hunter Henry and play a lot like Hunter Henry. And like you said, this defense is very talented. I think that they're good. I think that this team has potential to like be competitive in some games. And there's a chance they could be in the C tier. I also just this is one of those things where it's like I feel good about the potential of the offense, but it also feels like there's going to be a lot of growing pains for this offense because they're very young and there's a lot of inexperience on the offense. So I feel okay putting them in the D tier.
Yep.
You are also being very aggressive putting the Broncos in the F tier.
I don't know why that's being aggressive. They're a bad football team. I'm trying to think in the I'm trying to think in the NFC who would be in the F tier. You put the Vikings there?
No, because I think the Vikings defense is actually going to be very good.
Okay.
Man, this is making for great great entertainment right now. I know we're just
the Panthers. The Panthers are clearly.
Oh yeah, I would yeah.
So if I go to the entire NFL and say I have to put two teams in the entire NFL in the F tier, the Panthers are going to be there, and the Broncos are going to be there.
You don't have to put a team in the F tier. I'm giving you the option. This feels aggressive. Is all I'm saying.
I don't think they win 3 games this year.
You don't think no,
I don't think they win 4.
Games.
I think they could win 3. I don't think they win more than 3.
So if you're betting the under at 4 games.
Yeah.
Oof.
I don't like who am I? What am I betting on them to win with? Patrick.
I don't feel strongly about the Broncos in general, right? But like, this is very strong, and maybe this is like accurate, but I don't know. Now I'm trying to think of like what I feel excited about if I'm a Broncos fan, and it's really not much. Like
I think there's a legitimate path where Zach Wilson could be their week 1 starter. I think that's a legitimate possibility.
Yikes. Boy, that's so depressing. That is unbelievable. I'm gonna be thinking about that the rest of the night. That's rough.
Or Ben DiNucci.
You don't think Jarrett Stidham will beat out either of those two?
I think that if I was the GM or if I was the coach of this team, I'd Jarrett Stidham starting week one, not Bo Nix, not Zach Wilson, not Ben DiNucci. But I could see them become enamored with Zach Wilson and be like, hey, let's give him a shot. We know what Jarrett Stidham is. He's a backup quality quarterback. Maybe we can chase some upside the Jets didn't witness in Zach Wilson. That upside doesn't exist, but maybe they try to chase it.
I do not see a reality in which Sean Payton is quote unquote enamored with Zach Wilson as a player. I think that they took a shot to maybe get a reclamation backup project that maybe they could flip for something later. Yeah. I think that's their thought process. I think pretty strongly Bo Nix is their week 1 starter.
You think?
And
okay.
I don't see any there is no reason why a quarterback that started 61 games in NCAA play, in Division I NCAA play, who is 24 years old as a rookie, should be spending time on the bench learning. If he hasn't learned enough in his 61 starts as an NCAA quarterback, you picked the wrong guy. Period.
I just looked up to see if Tremaine Edmonds was younger than Bo Nix. He is not. So we've reached that point in all of our lifespan where Tremaine Edmonds is no longer youthful.
Good for you, Bo Nix. You're still younger than Tremaine Edmonds. Jeez, that's wild. I do like Audric Estime on this team and in this run game with him potentially. They still have Javonte Williams for whatever that's worth. He's so banged up all the time. I don't know what that will really accomplish for them, but they still have an offensive line that they really overpaid for last year, but is still good enough. There's the defense played fine last year. I like Vance Joseph in general as the defensive coordinator. I think they have some decent players on defense, even outside of Patrick Surtain. I don't know. I agree that they should be a D or an F. I feel better about putting them in a D, but I also like having an F team in there, so I'm okay with keeping them as an F team.
Real quick, your opinion. Would you switch Patriots and Broncos? Are you good?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't flip them. I would just bring the Broncos up to D.
Okay.
That's all. But I also don't feel strongly enough about it. They also still have Cortland Sutton, who is playing well and is a good player for them. So, there's that. And Marvin Mims Jr. has some legit potential at wide receiver as well.
We could switch them in the Jaguars if you want.
We'll wait until the middle of the season, and then you can brag to me all about it. All right. That's going to be it. I think this is... So, to recap, very quickly, because we're kind of running out of time here. The Chiefs, Bills, and Ravens are your Super Bowl contenders. The Bengals, Texans, Jets, Browns, and Colts are angling for a playoff spot. The Dolphins, Jags, and Steelers are blips on the radar. The Raiders, Titans, and Chargers are crud on a stick. The Patriots are down bad, and the Broncos are failures. Folks, thanks you for joining us here on the Cover One Roundup. If you have enjoyed the show, hit like on your way out. It helps the channel and this show immensely. Leave a comment as well. Subscribe to Cover One. Subscribe to Cover One Fantasy. Subscribe to Cover One College Football. You get all sorts of shows throughout the week. You get the Air Raid Hour starting in about 60 seconds. You've got the Under Review with Joe DeRosa. You've got Disguise Coverage with Anthony. You've got Film Room with Anthony and Eric. You've got Eric and Aaron doing the flagship show. You got Thomas on Buffalo Late Night. You've got the Cover One Fantasy Show with Chris Chusey. You've got Cover One Draft Weekly with John and Daniel. Uber, where can the people find you?
On Twitter, at UberHansen, drunkenly tweeting always.
Always. You can also find me at DFAUXY or at DFoxy. Thank you guys for joining tonight. Thank you for all the love and appreciate all the comments. We love each and every one of you. Okay, bye.